mean, how did that feel? He comes home, you tell him, like, what is that emotional roller coaster like?
Once he got home and once we talked about it, I brought him into the room. He actually could tell right away that I had been crying. I just said straight out, I have breast cancer. His immediate reaction was, I can't do this without you. And I said, you're not going to have to.
Picture this. You're 31, giving birth to your second child, and you're told that you have breast cancer, pretty serious breast cancer. Today on The Messy Parts, we're going to have on Parul Somani. She's talking about her journey as a high achiever, MIT, Harvard, Bain, and then this really big messy part. Finding your way through that and actually then redefining your life, not immediately, but gradually. There's a lot to discuss. Well, so first of all, thank you so much for coming. And I'm going to go right for the mess. You're 31 years old.
Mm-hmm.
You're having your second child. You're in the hospital.
Yeah.
Looks like the baby's okay. And then all of a sudden they disappear with your child.
Yeah.
And you also then discover pretty quickly that you have a pretty intense form of cancer.
Yeah.
So talk about messy.
Yes. It all happened back to back.
How do you even continue to move forward in that moment? Like, what was going through your head?
When my daughter was first admitted to the NICU, that was an experience where we're overwhelmed with fear and uncertainty, but there's actually nothing that we could do other than be present in that moment.
And worried.
And worry and be present with all of those hard and uncomfortable feelings.
Yeah.
And in those days, actually, so she was in the NICU for 5 days and then thankfully was ultimately discharged with a clean bill of health. But during those 5 days, we truly were actually just taking it one moment after the next, one day after the next, because there was so much to worry about, but not anything that we could do to rush the process.
Mm-hmm.
And so focusing on...
Although that's not true because they were going to take the baby and not move you because you'd had a C-section.
That is true.
So they were going to leave you behind and take the baby to different locations.
Oh, yes. Over my dead body, they were going to leave me behind
Right. So,
while,
I mean,
while they
actually,
took my daughter away.
Yeah.
So that is a very good point. After the C-section, when my daughter had to be unexpectedly intubated and transferred, they were saying that they were going to take her in an ambulance an hour away to a hospital that actually has that neonatal ICU, but that I wouldn't be able to go. And it was unfathomable to me that that would be a scenario that any mother would be presented with. Finding those moments of advocacy, finding those moments of empowerment where I'm like, I can't stop my baby from struggling with what she's struggling with, but I can be there for her. And making sure that they also provided me with an ambulance, also provided, an option for my mother to escort me in this ambulance to the hospital was something that I could control.
Well, you're clearly good at being convincing. But what you're saying makes me want to actually ask you about your childhood, right? Because how you learn to advocate for yourself and communicate, which is really what you're describing, that has to have come from your childhood.
In some ways, I learned the power of doing what you need to do and work ethic from my immigrant parents. I was born in India and we came to the US when I was very young, and I saw them work hard. I saw them do what they needed to do to craft this life for my sister and I. And yet when it came to situations like health and crises, there's a social expectation of being very secretive about it. In India, even to this day, doctors are almost held on this elevated state.
Yeah, they're revered. They're want revered. Everyone to be an engineer, just like Iranians.
Yes.
Be an engineer or a doctor.
Yes, they are revered and they are not necessarily questioned.
Mm-hmm.
And so then my parents applied that in America too, that when my mom got diagnosed with early onset breast cancer in her 30s.
How old were you?
I was 6 at the time. It took me a long time, though, to understand why we couldn't talk about it outside of our family.
Did you know? I mean, 6, you have some awareness.
I barely knew. I have flashes of memories. Mm-hmm. And at this time, we were in Portland, Oregon.
Okay.
And we were on a ground floor apartment complex. I just remember that when we would go outside, my mom was wearing a wig and that it was uncomfortable for her. So when we were inside the house, she didn't want to wear it, but she also didn't want anyone walking by to potentially see her.
Mhm.
And so even though it was broad daylight, we would have the curtains closed and the lights all on.
So you knew something was going on, but
Yeah.
you didn't have like a family conversation or a discussion about what was happening.
I don't remember now if the word cancer was used in that initial conversation or not. It possibly was, and I just probably didn't grasp it.
So interestingly for you, when you have cancer, so here,
Yeah.
years apart, you have cancer about the same time as your mom.
Yeah.
For you actually do the inverse. It's like you called it a rebellion, which I thought was funny.
Mhm.
You actually start blogging about it. Not
Yeah.
only do you talk about it with your family, you start telling the world. You start telling 85 million people and all over the world about it.
Yes, because growing up with the feeling that this is a private thing that shouldn't be talked about, I always respected it because it was my mom's story to tell, but I also felt the burden of that secret. Growing up, if a high school or college friend had a parent, a mother going through breast cancer, I would just listen to the story as a friend, but I would never then share that, like, oh, my mother had also gone through something like this. It became clear to me at a pretty young age, before I even got diagnosed, that if anything like that were to happen to me, I wouldn't want to hide it.
So let's go back to that minute where they tell you you have cancer.
I was 31 years old. I was at home just 2 days after being discharged from the hospital. My newborn baby had just been discharged from the neonatal ICU, and we had just experienced nearly a week of what was probably the most scary and stressful time of our life. And it finally reached this point that we're home, our family's complete, we're healthy, and it actually truly felt really joyous. And it was Father's Day weekend. My husband had taken my toddler out for Father's Day celebrations. And it was exactly the day of my newborn's 1 week birthday. And I was sitting in bed holding my newborn in my arms when I got the call from a breast surgeon on a Saturday.
That's never
And I
good.
immediately knew that this can't be good news. And I answer the phone and she says, I'm sorry, but the mass is malignant after all. And it's that after all that really stuck with me, because multiple healthcare providers, from the moment I had felt my own lump and like raised the red flag on it to getting these biopsy results, had said it's nothing to worry about because I'm 31, I'm pregnant, and it's most likely a clogged milk duct.
How long was that period?
It was very short because I was actually at an ultrasound appointment for the baby at 38 weeks because there was some monitoring that she had to have when I first felt the lump. And I actually immediately asked my OBGYN about it. And she also was an example of the first provider who said it's probably nothing to worry about. But because I had had genetic testing done, because I knew I had an elevated risk, she ultimately agreed to give me a referral. But I never made it to that appointment because only 2 days after I first felt the lump did my water break early, and I went in for this C-section.
But you were already somebody who was advocating for yourself because you felt the lump and you pushed to actually get a referral, which somebody might have just flubbed off.
Yes. I will say that my husband was also by my side advocating for me on this front, because one thing that I haven't shared yet is his own mother had passed away at age 31 from breast cancer. And now his wife was 31 years old, feeling a lump, having an elevated risk of breast cancer. And he was the one who actually ultimately wheeled me, because I still couldn't walk from my C-section, from the NICU to a neighboring breast clinic, because even though we had missed that other referral appointment, he was not going to let it get dismissed either. After the milk came in, I actually couldn't feel the lump anymore. I easily could have dismissed in my own head that they were right. It's a clogged milk duct. That's why I can't feel it anymore. I possibly could have breastfed her for a year like I ultimately did my first, and I wouldn't have felt that lump again until it would have been way too late.
I mean, how did that feel? He comes home, you tell him, like, what is that emotional roller coaster like? And how do you pick yourself back up to keep functioning?
When I first got the news from the doctor, I actually instinctively went into a little bit of a warrior mode where I was actually like kind of matter of fact. And it was only when she said, and obviously this means you will need to stop breastfeeding soon. That's when I like threw my head in my hands and started bawling.
You didn't call him. You waited for
I
him
didn't
to
call
come
him.
home.
I didn't call him. Once he got home and once we talked about it, I brought him into the room. He actually could tell right away that I had been crying. I just said straight out, I have breast cancer. His immediate reaction was, I can't do this without you. And I said, you're not going to have to.
Did you know you were going to be okay?
I had complete conviction that I'm going to be okay because it was honestly just too painful to think of any alternate.
It's all about flipping your mindset, right?
Mhm.
But on an purely analytical level,
Yes.
you are aware that it may not work out.
So there is a book called Super Survivors that I only came across years later, where the authors research and interview all of these people who have gone through very harrowing experiences in their life. And of those that experience post-traumatic growth as opposed to stress, they labeled as super survivors and tried to identify what is that one trait that was common amongst that population. And they identified that they all maintained what they coined grounded hope. It's not just blind hope in the future. It embodies, one, the term grounded, that is anchored in reality.
Where do you think that comes from? And people ask me this question, right? But I'm curious to know if you've been able to dissect it. You're much more framework oriented than me. So I'm very curious because you clearly went in and dug into this and you've researched it. Where do you think that comes from in your upbringing or in your journey to date?
I think there's some element of immigrant upbringing where you see your parents overcome struggle and work hard. There's some wiring in there that just gets passed down. When it comes to something like resilience, we're not just born with it or not born with it.
You think that you can learn resilience?
You can learn resilience, yes. It is a actual muscle that we can exercise and we can strengthen, but it takes time and intention just like any exercise would.
That's interesting because you're also a parent. And I ask this question often of people. To some degree, I learned resilience because that was the only option. It was either roll up like a ball or be resilient. And yet with our kids, we don't want them to have, I don't want hardship for them in order for them to learn resilience. So I always wonder, can you learn it? And you're saying that you can. And a lot of our listeners, a lot of people in the world now, we're living through a time of incredible chaos and trauma on a pretty regular basis, whether it's at home or from afar. What advice do you have for somebody who's going through a traumatic moment? Like, how do they find what you're describing to get to the other side?
It starts by actually creating space for what we're feeling and not feeling like we have to power through with some blind optimism, but actually embrace and accept that, yes, these are very uncertain times. These are scary times. You have to actually be able to name what you're feeling to then be able to address it.
To find your way through.
So, but you don't want to get trapped in it either.
Yeah. But so I think back to sort of your journey, right? You're living in your second generation.
I was actually born in India,
you were
but I was very young when I came.
You were young when you came.
Yeah.
And then you grew up in a pretty traditional setting, it sounds like.
Yeah.
And because you end up marrying your childhood sweetheart, which I love. And, you do what many of us do, which is you follow the expectations, right? MIT for engineering, Harvard, then you go on to Bain, sort of doing all the right things, all the right markers. You have breast cancer, you get through it, you study it, you build a framework around it. Like you're definitely an engineer. And I was interested in sort of that journey for you and how even from that, you were like trying to find your purpose now. For some reason, there was this transformation that begins to happen for you where you're like, I want to care more about what I'm doing. So even with the startup, you end up at a health startup.
So initially, I had just left Bain and joined a consumer technology startup in the retail space. Was I passionate about retail? Not at all. But
You could have been. I would have bought that.
I mean, it wasn't the priority at that time. And I probably actually just didn't know what I was passionate about either, right? Like I had just been doing consulting
Did you not
my entire
know
career.
because you were on a path all along? Do you know what I mean? Like, I don't know if we had permission to go think about that.
I was on a path that I didn't know where it would lead to. And I actually ended up staying on this whole Bain consulting path for many years longer than I even thought I would. The decision to stay was optimizing for something important to me at that point.
Which was what?
So it varied. When I first graduated, it would be more aligned with like the interpersonal skills that I enjoy versus the other option that I was considering and where some internships had been on were like the sales and trading floors at Wall Street, which is so baffling to me now because I'm like, how is that aligned with my like priorities and personality? And I definitely only ended up on that path because in college, you end up kind of getting swayed by where the wind is blowing. And it's like, oh, that's the prestigious internship to get.
I was going to say, I totally, I'm following your prestige path, right? The marker college, the marker business school, the marker job, right? So you go MIT, Harvard, Bain. These are all about prestige. It's so interesting because I took my last semester in college abroad, which was a crazy thing to do. But really part of it was I knew that the people who recruited on campus were the consultings and the banks. And I was like, if I'm not here, I won't be tempted. Because it was so tempting to go down that path, right? Like you're like, hey, one more notch on that ladder. I opted out. And so I was forcing myself to try and figure out like, what is it I really want to do? Turned out you can't really do that either. You can't intentionally figure out your passion. So you go on this path and you discover consulting, which is incredibly appealing. But, you know, having hired consultants and been a consultant myself, like it's a hard life. You are working all the time. You know, it's a 24/7 sleep under your desk job, to be clear. It's not a have a personal life job.
So the reason to stay was definitely changing year by year. In those early years, it was a hard job, but it was a great culture and set of people. And the friends that I made are lifelong friends to this day.
Yeah, you're in the trenches.
None of us are there anymore. Yes. You know, I think the perspective I had around it then is that this is the time in my life to work hard. But then when it came to going to, you know, business school, why did I decide to go back to Bain? Well, not only would they cover the cost of business school, which was
They're very good at
it's like, you know, the luring you back in. But the clarity that I had was that when I'm in business school, my by then husband was going to be working in New York. And then we are both from the West Coast and we both want to go back to the West Coast. I have the geographic flexibility in a company I've already established myself in to be able to transfer.
It's all very strategic.
It's all very strategic and intentional.
There's so much control in what you're describing to me, right? It's a path that's optimizing for control.
100%.
And then life throws you the curveball and you learn that is just not real. You actually have no control. It's such a hard lesson for us all to learn because humans definitely like things that are familiar and control. And yet you definitely got that lesson at 31 in a big way.
It's this realization that time is limited that makes you, yes, on one hand, experience that there's so much out of your control. If you only stop there, then how victimizing is that?
But you don't leave on the other side of cancer and go become an Indian dancer, which, by the way, I know you love to do Indian dancing. But I mean, you don't like totally pivot out of the world of business.
No. This is a multi-year process to reflect on what I went through. What does that mean for its impact on me? What does that mean for like how I want to spend my time? But it wasn't that I necessarily had an answer to it right away or like suddenly knew what I wanted to dive into. My maternity turned medical leave came to an end and I just went back to that same retail startup that I had been at before. I ended up staying on for another 2 years, largely out of loyalty to the team because those colleagues had been—
They stood by you.
So supportive. I mean, I had only been working there for 6 months before my delivery and diagnosis. And some of them even took me to chemo appointments. Even that startup journey was another test of resilience.
Mm-hmm.
Going through, rounds of layoffs, going through figuring out, do we sell? Do we go for profitability? Right? All of these like entrepreneurial decisions that you make. It was about 2 years later that we reached an inflection point where we got acquired by a bigger retail company. And I took the opportunity to leave.
Did you immediately go back to another job?
When I left Bain and when I left this startup, I left without having anything lined up.
Because how did that feel? Because that can be terrifying.
That can feel terrifying. Well, so with Bain, I actually thought I might want to start something myself. And I was like noodling with my own entrepreneurial ideas. But then when I learned I was pregnant 2 weeks after leaving Bain, I realized I don't know if I'm ready to
Maybe
be
not the right moment.
Yes, exactly. And I also don't want to be unemployed indefinitely until like after this baby's born. And so I actually like turbocharged a recruiting effort and joined this startup like at the end of my first trimester. You made the point earlier that you can't intentionally find your passion. I knew I didn't have clarity of what my mission was, but I felt like my mission had found me. What happened is I came across a TechCrunch article about this startup in the genetic testing space that was working to democratize access to genetic testing for hereditary cancers.
And you're like, no, this is me.
This is literally my life story.
So you go in for what seems like a purpose-driven role. Seems perfect for you, right? It feels like it fits all those boxes. But then it didn't end up working out the way again, I go back to you think you have control, you go in, and then that ends up not at all how you expect.
Initially, it does. Initially, it's amazing. It felt like everything was aligning. Like the skills I had built in my career, I was now applying into this like B2B marketing role. I was doing like work that I was loving. It was impacting people and benefiting the world. It was a profession I was getting paid for. So when it comes to the Ikigai framework and all of those elements that make you think about like, what is your reason for being? It's the intersection of 4 quadrants or Venn diagram. It's what you love to do, what you're good at, what the world needs. And in Western culture, the 4th element is interpreted as what you can be paid for. And I didn't know of Ikigai prior to working at this healthcare startup. I just have like a family WhatsApp thread that my dad's always like forwarding random things to. And so I took a closer look at it. And in that moment, I actually felt like through this healthcare startup,
I am your Ikigai
serving my Ikigai. And it was so thrilling to feel that and know that it is anchored in this very difficult experience, but it was almost creating meaning from it now.
Yeah, it's like purpose out of despair. So you get a call from a friend who says that they've just laid off people and you're caught unawares.
I knew the company was going through not like a restructuring, but like a change in business strategy. When I then reached the office and I was called into a conference room with the CEO, a legal representative, and my direct supervisor, the CMO, even in that moment, I was so convinced that, they want to talk to me about what's happening to other people.
You had no
idea. That I'm
idea.
being called in.
You had no idea it was coming for you.
No idea it was coming for me. I was completely blindsided.
I'm going to say, generally speaking, if you get called into a meeting with your boss and HR and legal are there, maybe like 99.5% of the time, the sticky's coming.
In hindsight, it's so obvious. I was just so not in the headspace to even think of that possibility as happening to me. I bawled.
You did?
Not in the moment.
Not in the moment. Because I think I read that you actually started problem solving for them as one always does.
It was
Let me help you.
Ridiculous. Like it actually like upsets me now thinking back about it because I did ask some questions because I was so very confused because
it's hard to take in.
It was very hard to take in. And I want to emphasize that this wasn't just getting laid off from a job, which is hard enough for anyone because there's the financial implication, there's like the hit to your ego and your identity. But this was a job that not only had I personally defined meaning to, the company had actually like interviewed my entire family and created this entire video montage of our family's cancer journey and the impact
you were
genetic
deep.
testing had.
You were deep.
That video had literally been like shown to millions of people, and it was playing on the like TV in the office, like on loop, like as I'm being laid off.
So you're being laid off, and it feels like the ultimate betrayal.
Yes. But in that very moment, when they first tell me the news, I'm so shocked. It was so awkward. I actually ended up saying sorry to the CEO who's laying me off because I couldn't process my own.
You felt
hurt,
bad for him. It must be so
I
hard
felt
to lay
bad
me
for
off.
him. It was ridiculous. But because I had just been on the other side of layoffs at the previous company, I think the words out of my mouth were literally like, I know this must be so hard for you.
Yes, show up with empathy. That's amazing. And by the way, I'm going to say telling.
Thankfully, I wasn't forced to sign anything immediately. I was not allowed to say goodbye to anyone.
It's such a brutal ending.
It's such a brutal ending, for like a team you've been working with, a place you like put your whole heart into. It took me a long time to like understand this, but it's not personal.
I know, but it feels so personal.
It feels so deeply personal, but it's literally the protocol that we're taught in business school about how it should work. Is like you convey the news, you have them grab their things from the desk and have them leave effectively escorted, and the rest of their things will be mailed to them. And it wasn't like just me. It's not like this like firing situation that had happened. It was like this company-wide layoff, and this is what was happening.
It doesn't matter if you're fired for cause or not. It just feels terrible.
It feels terrible.
So you go home and you cry.
Oh yeah. I start bawling as soon as I get to my car. I sit in my car for a while because I like don't even feel equipped to drive. And then I drive myself home and I cry more. And this is where that period that I was talking about starts of honestly a lot of phone calls. Like, wanting to check up on other team members, like who else was impacted? Because when this happens, you actually don't know, is it you're one out of 10?
Here you go. You're back to helping other people in your moment of need. I like it.
I couldn't, undo the layoff. I couldn't fix the business like strategy or whatever that the company was struggling with. But what I could do is check in on the people that I care about, that I had worked with. What I could do is try to share what I know and learn from them what's happening, kind of going into information collection mode.
And that's a good tip. Like if somebody's been laid off and, they're past the crying in the car phase, what is a piece of advice you have for them now that you are on the other side, on the other side of that?
I think it's understanding just tactically what is the paperwork you're being provided with and what is like okay for you to sign, what is okay to push back on. You could only get that information by like seeking advice from others. This is where it gets a little bit tricky because those uncomfortable feelings include shame.
Mm-hmm.
And when you feel shame, it can be easier to just isolate and really draw inward. And I think that's probably the first thing I actually did is when I got home. Like there wasn't like an immediate calling of people. I think I probably just like crawled into bed and threw the blanket over my head and like didn't leave for a couple hours before I actually then like started this outreach. But it's like you almost have to actively intervene on yourself and not allow those feelings of shame or otherwise that are drawing you inward to prevent you from reaching out selectively. I'm not saying like go blast it to everyone immediately or go just tell everyone just for
like,
kicks.
I've been fired.
Yes,
please call me.
Exactly. If you allow yourself to be vulnerable to select people, someone who might just be the shoulder you need to cry on, someone who might be the experience sharer. This is how they navigated it. What can you learn from it? In a way, that's almost a similar journey I went through even after the cancer diagnosis. Because as easy as it is to want to just cry under the blanket and sit in the fear, what was a lot more empowering was to actually call people who are doctors, call people who have gone through cancer themselves.
It goes back to taking control.
It goes back to taking control. One of the sayings that my husband and I used to talk about, I think it's used in the military, is that hope is not a course of action. You need to accept the brutal reality you need to believe in a better future, but then you also have to do something to actually create that better future. Sometimes action isn't making the problem go away. I can't undiagnose myself, but what I can do is figure out what questions to ask. What I can do is certain levels of research to inform myself so that when I make that doctor's appointment or I get that second opinion, I'm going in prepared.
How long from that point to your new journey? Because you actually finally get off that hamster wheel.
The layoff itself was at the end of 2018. And I knew I was in a not great place emotionally. And it was also going into the holidays. There was at least going to be a few weeks before I even think about what to do in the new year.
I like that it's just weeks for you. I'm like, months. Okay.
It turned into months. And I'm so thankful that I gave myself permission to take that time.
And had the privilege.
And had 100%. And that I had the luxury to be able to do so. For high achievers, for myself, it's easy to get drawn into someone else wanting you for something. We're not taught to step back and think about what do we actually care about? What are we choosing versus the choices that are pushed upon us? I had spoken to a friend of mine about how I have no idea what I want to do next. And he told me to wait for the bells to ring. And, I went into my 10-year business school reunion unemployed.
Oh, yeah, that's a terrifying one.
It's terrifying. And
there you are at Harvard. What do you do? Oh, love that. Yeah. Why did you go to the reunion? Because you could have opted to say, you know what, I'm going to skip this one.
I missed my 5-year HBS reunion because it was literally that same weekend and time period that I was delivering my second daughter and then being diagnosed with breast cancer. I loved my business school experience. I loved my business school friends.
So the discomfort of not having a title wasn't big enough for you to skip it.
It wasn't big enough for me to skip it, putting myself in that situation and actually just being honest with the people that I met. I was only met with vulnerability in return.
If you share the messy parts, it actually opens the world up to you.
The number of people that then were that sounds amazing, or I've really been unhappy in my job for years.
It's amazing how many people in business school are not actually happy in their jobs.
The thing is that no matter what it is that you're feeling, you're not alone in it, but you don't know that until you share it and then give others permission to share back.
So tell us what it is that you're doing now. What is this phase? Because also you have a new book, which, I think is not an easy thing to do.
So what I do now is I work as a keynote speaker, a writer turned author, and a mindset coach focused on helping people, teams, companies navigate uncertainty and make the hard choices in the face of change.
I mean, it's easy for somebody to listen to this conversation and say oh, she's had all these messy parts, but she's found her way through. And now here she is with autonomy, and now she's an author and it looks so perfect. Are there messy parts to this journey?
The past 6 years have been messy in multiple ways. There was launching a public speaking career in the October of 2019.
Oh, right before COVID.
Public
Perfect
speaking
timing.
literally came to a screeching halt months later. And so I pivoted virtual and started presenting into a webcam because that's what needed to be done. The journey of writing a book has been 5 years in the making. I had written a 100-page book plan, fleshed out an entire version of what this book would be. I pitched it to traditional publishers and got rejection after rejection after rejection. Going back to your original question around, has this part been messy? I think
it's all messy.
It's all messy.
And honestly, the good stuff's in the mess. Okay, we're going to
learning is in the mess.
The growth is definitely in the mess. Okay, we're going to do a couple of rapid fire questions.
Okay.
Ready? Okay. Well, I was going to say, what's your messiest moment on a scale of 1 to 10? But it feels like you had a lot of those. What's the one you would pick?
The messiest moment, ranking on a 10, is holding my newborn baby and being diagnosed with breast cancer.
When was the last time you cried?
Last week. Oh, actually, this morning. Yeah, I was actually now.
Actually, right now. What is a career myth that you think is a waste of time?
That early on in your career, you need to find your passion and purpose.
What's one thing you would never do again?
Well, 2 knee surgeries later, I am no longer able to do dance moves on the floor and,
No more
and,
dance
and
moves.
trust myself to get back up.
What advice would you have for somebody who's having a crisis of confidence?
Name what the hard thing is that they're facing and try to understand what it is, and then not hold themselves back from sharing those feelings with people that love and support them. The more that we connect with others, share with others, the stronger and more resilient we become.
I totally agree with that. Okay, so my last one for you is your book title is The Path of Least Regret. If you look back, do you have a regret? And what is it?
There's a reason the book is not called The Path of No Regret, because I actually don't believe that we can live a life of no regrets. Just from like a professional standpoint, sometimes I wonder if my career would have gone in a different trajectory if I had not rushed my job search after Bain, joining a super early stage startup that like may or may not go somewhere. Calling it a regret is hard because it ended up being this supportive team of people.
It ends up being part of the journey.
Exactly. Being able to recognize the role it played in you becoming who you are, in where you're at today, that only happened because of all of those nonlinear and messy.
I'm going to borrow Mel Robbins and say you have to let go. You make the decision, the best decision you can with intention, and then you let it go.
And I think saying let it go itself is hard advice because it's
not so easy to do.
It's not easy, and it's asking something of people. One of the things I struggled with the most after being diagnosed was actually grieving that I couldn't be the mom to my newborn baby that I wanted to be in those early months. And it took me time to let go of that guilt. And what helped me let go of it was not just like, I'm going to decide to let go, but it was by reframing the experience as I'm actually ensuring that I'm going to be there for her in the longer term.
Yeah. Thank you so much for coming on.
Thank you. This was great.
I hope you enjoyed this episode of The Messy Parts. There was a lot of messy parts that I know were quite unexpected in a story that is very much about achievement and control. We can all relate to that. Now remember, tell 10 friends. I'm like a walking sandwich board. Tell 10 friends, recommend it, like it, share it, review it. That's how we get to share more messy stories with you.